They told her she was property, a thing to be bought, sold, and broken. But they forgot one simple rule. Sometimes property fights back. Her name was Rosa, and she walked through the New Mexico desert like a ghost with a grudge. She wasn't trying to get somewhere. She was trying to outlive a past that was hunting her with dogs and men and memories sharper than glass. Her boots were mismatched. Her skirt was the color of bone. Her hand was wrapped in a strip of cloth, hiding a burn mark shaped like a promise she'd been forced to keep. She didn't limp. Every step she took was a hammer blow against the dirt, a debt being collected. 3 days ago, she'd stepped off the road, away from the men who marked her skin, away from the life that had tried to swallow her whole. She carried no map, just a cracked canteen, a knife, and a silence that had settled in her bones a week ago in Santa Lucia. That was the night she'd plunged a broken bottle into the throat of the overseer, the man who wanted to drag her into a cellar for old time's sake. She ran before his boots even stopped twitching. She rode a mule until it collapsed. Then she walked. 3 days. No water. No words. No plan. Just the blistering sun and the mountains in the distance that might have been a mirage. She walked toward them anyway. What else was there to do? By the afternoon, her body gave its final answer. Her knees buckled. She didn't cry out. She just fell, a soft grunt as her body hit the sand and stone. Her cheek rested against a hot slab of rock. She tasted dirt and blood, and then a shadow fell over her. A figure stood there, tall and still, not white. His voice was low, rough, like rocks grinding together. He spoke in a language she'd never heard. Not Spanish, not English. Apache. Then the world went black. She woke up to the smell of smoke and pine. She was inside a rock shelter, the ceiling curving over her like a frozen wave. A fire danced, throwing shadows on the stone walls. Her burned hand was clean, wrapped in a fresh bandage. Her canteen was gone, but a tin cup of warm, bitter tea sat beside her head. The man was there. He sat across the fire, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. He didn't look at her. He didn't speak. He just worked the stone against the steel, a sound that was both calming and terrifying. Rosa tried to sit up. Pain, sharp and blinding, shot through her ribs. A gasp escaped her lips. In 2 silent steps, he was beside her, crouching. He smelled of earth and sage and something wild. Without a word, he held the cup to her lips. She flinched, pulling her head back. He didn't force her. He just waited. The silence stretched. Finally, her thirst won. She drank. The tea was bitter, like boiled bark. "What is this?" she rasped, her voice a stranger in her own throat. "Yarrow," he said. His English was slow, careful. "Stops fever, eases pain." "You're Apache," she stated. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer. He just stood and went back to his fire, back to his knife. She watched him, cataloging every movement, the way he carried his weight on the balls of his feet, the way his eyes never stopped moving, scanning the shadows even inside the cave. He had the body of a warrior, but he moved like a ghost. For 2 days, he was a phantom who brought her food. Beans, hard bread, jerky. He refilled the tea. He checked her bandage without ever touching more than was necessary. There were no questions, no prying looks, just a silent, detached kind of care that unsettled her more than threats would have. On the 3rd morning, she stood on her own. Her legs trembled, but they held. She stepped outside into the blinding sun. The world was vast and empty. Canyon walls, jagged ridges, and the broken teeth of distant mountains. The man was chopping wood, the rhythmic thump of the axe echoing in the stillness. He glanced up as she emerged, but didn't stop. She walked closer. "You live out here alone?" "Yes." "No family?" "No." She had to ask. She had to know. "Why did you help me?" He stopped chopping. He let the axe rest on his shoulder, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. They were dark, ancient, and held no pity. "I don't leave people to die," he said. "Doesn't mean I keep them." "Fair enough." She held out her good hand. "Rosa." He looked at her hand, then briefly took it. His grip was firm, calloused. "Nikai." She nodded. "You have a horse?" "Dead." "Mine too." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a truce, an understanding between 2 people who had nothing left but the ground beneath their feet. That night by the fire, she finally told him, I killed someone. It wasn't a confession. It was a warning. He didn't flinch. He just looked at her across the flames. Why? He was going to take what wasn't his. Nikai nodded slowly, a deep, knowing gesture. That's the only reason that matters. The next morning, an old saddlebag was by the entrance to the shelter. Inside was a worn hat, a full canteen, and a coil of rope. Yours, he said simply. Her heart sank. She looked at him, her throat tight. You want me to leave? No, he said, his gaze steady, unreadable. I want you to choose. She held his gaze, and in that moment, she understood. He wasn't kicking her out. He was giving her something no one ever had before. A choice, a chance. There was nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. Then I'll stay, she said. And just like that, the ground beneath her felt solid for the first time in her life. The days fell into a strange rhythm. Not comfort, but a shared silence. Like two wild animals learning to occupy the same patch of shade without tearing each other apart. He was a mystery, a man made of secrets and shadows, and she was a woman running from a past that refused to die. They didn't ask questions. They didn't offer stories. It suited them both. He taught her things, not with words but with actions. He'd hand her a knife, gesture toward a rabbit, and watch. The first time she threw it like she was asking permission. It skittered off a rock. He picked it up, handed it back. Hold it like you mean to kill something, he said, his voice flat. She tried again. The rabbit didn't get away. He showed her how to set a snare, using wire and weeds and patience. Patience is everything, he'd said. That and hunger, she'd replied. A flicker of something, maybe respect, crossed his face. Sometimes when he was out checking his traps, she'd climb the ridge and stare south, back toward the world of men. The memories were always there, like blisters under the skin. Messala, the burned-out town, the cellar, the face of the overseer, twisted in shock as the bottle went in. She didn't feel remorse. She felt empty, like that part of her had been carved out and thrown away. One evening, as they ate the rabbit she'd skinned, Nikai suddenly went still. He lifted his head, like an animal scenting danger on the wind. Something's off, I nurse Silwern, he said. She listened. The desert was always quiet, but this was different. A dead silence. The birds, he said. Too quiet. He was right. There was no chatter from the scrub brush, no wings slicing the air, just the low moan of the wind. Storm coming? She asked. Maybe, he said, but his eyes were scanning the horizon, and she knew he didn't believe it. He was looking for something else. The next morning he didn't go far. He stayed close to the shelter, climbing the highest ridges, his body a tense silhouette against the sky. His watchfulness was a virus. It infected her, too. She found herself cleaning tools she didn't need to clean, checking the edges of their small hollow, her hand never far from the knife at her belt. The answer came just before sunset. Nikai slid down from the rocks, his face hard as granite. Smoke, he said. One word. It landed like a stone in her gut. She was on her feet instantly. Where? South slope, 4 miles maybe. He stared into the distance. Too small for a campfire, too deliberate. You think they're tracking? She asked, her voice tight. He finally looked at her, and his eyes held a chilling certainty. He nodded once. Her throat went dry. Me? His gaze didn't waver. Or me? The world shrank to the space between them, the fire and the unseen threat hunting them in the dusk. They weren't just two strays anymore. They were a target. We need to go, she said, her survival instincts screaming. Not yet, Nikai said, his voice calm, dangerous. We wait. We watch. If it's a scout, he'll circle. He'll get careless. He moved to a loose slab of stone at the back of the shelter and pulled it away. Behind it, wrapped in oilskin, was a rifle, a Winchester, old but clean. He handed it to her. She took it without a word. The weight of it was familiar, heavy, final. Used to shooting? He asked. She worked the lever action, checked the sights. The smooth, oiled click was a language she understood. Enough, she said. That night's sleep was a luxury neither of them could afford. They took turns on watch, Rosa curled near the fire, the rifle a cold, hard comfort against her chest. Nikai sat on a rock just outside the shelter's mouth, a statue carved from the night, his eyes fixed on the southern horizon. No attack came, but in the morning the smoke was gone. Someone wanted to be seen, Nikai said, his voice grim. Then they wanted to disappear. It wasn't a warning, it was bait, a question hanging in the air. We know you're here. What will you do? They packed supplies. Jerky, dried beans filling both canteens. Rosa wrapped her knife tight to her calf, the leather of familiar chafe against her skin. Nikai checked the sky. No clouds, no wind. The stillness was a held breath. Late that afternoon, they decided to check the snares they'd set 2 days prior. It was a risk, leaving the relative safety of the hollow, but they needed food, and more importantly, they needed to know what was out there. We go slow, Nikai said. No scent, no talk. Rosa followed, mimicking his movements, stepping where he stepped, trying to be as much a ghost as he was. Her steps were still too loud, her presence too solid. She was a creature of towns and roads, learning the language of the wild one painful lesson at a time. The first snare was empty. The wire glinted in the sun, undisturbed. The second was the same. A knot of tension in Rosa's stomach began to loosen. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe it was just a passing rider. Then they reached the third. From a distance, it looked like a bundle of discarded cloth, snagged on the wire near a large boulder. As they got closer, the shape resolved itself. It wasn't cloth. Rosa's heart stopped. It was a child. A little girl, no more than 7, was huddled beside the rock. Her dress was torn, her bare feet were scratched and bleeding. Her black hair was matted with dust and twigs. In her lap, she clutched a small doll made of corn husks. She wasn't crying, she wasn't moving. She was just there, staring at nothing. Rosa moved first, crouching down slowly, making her movements small, unthreatening. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice soft, a sound she hadn't used in years. "Are you hurt?" The girl looked at her. Her eyes were huge, black, and utterly, terrifyingly empty. Nikai was right behind them, his body rigid, his hand hovering over the knife on his belt. "She's Apache," he said, his voice a low whisper. "Mescalero, maybe." Rosa reached out a hand slowly. "It's okay. We're not going to hurt you." The girl didn't react. Her gaze slid past Rosa, past Nikai, fixed on some horror only she could see. Nikai dropped to one knee, his eyes not on the child, but on the ground around her. His fingers traced patterns in the dust. "Tracks," he said, his voice tight with a new kind of urgency. "Big ones. A man." She followed him, or ran from him. "Where is he now?" Rosa asked, her eyes still locked on the girl's vacant face. Nikai touched a scuffed boot print. "Gone. Day old, maybe 2. They waited. The silence was broken only by the wind. The girl said nothing. She didn't even blink. Rosa stood up, her decision made. "We can't leave her here." "I didn't say we would," Nikai replied. He looked at the child, his expression unreadable. "She's not bleeding, not sick." "She's in shock," Rosa finished for him. "Or worse." She held out her arms to the girl. "Do you want to come with us, Nina?" The girl didn't move, didn't nod, but she allowed Rosa to lift her. She weighed almost nothing, a tiny bundle of bones and trauma. They brought her back to the shelter. Rosa made a small bed for her with a spare blanket, gave her a few sips of water, and mashed up some beans. The girl ate mechanically, without tasting, her eyes still far away. The sun went down and the fire crackled, a lonely spark of warmth in the vast darkness. It was only then, with the shadows dancing on the cave walls, that the girl finally spoke. Her voice was a tiny whisper, fragile as a moth's wing. "My name is Nadita." Rosa glanced at Nikai. He hadn't moved, but his attention was absolute. Rosa turned back to the girl, her heart aching. "Where is your family, Nadita?" The girl's small hands clutched the corn-husk doll so tightly her knuckles went white. Her lips formed a single, devastating word. "Gone." That one word changed everything. Gone. It hung in the air of the shelter, heavier than smoke. It was a word Rosa knew well, a word that tasted like ash and kerosene, and the silence after the soldiers left. She was no longer just a survivor. Nikai was no longer just an outcast. They were something else now. Guardians. And their tiny silent charge was a magnet for the worst kind of evil. "They'll come for her," Rosa said to Nikai at dawn. They were on the ridge watching the sun bleed across the horizon. "I know," he said, his eyes scanning the south. "Who are they?" she asked. "The men who take children? Trade them." The word felt vile on her tongue. Slavers. Nikai's jaw tightened. He didn't need to confirm it. She saw the answer in the hard set of his shoulders. "She's like I was," Rosa said quietly, the admission costing her more than she expected. "Only younger." He finally looked at her then, a deep, searching look that saw past the dirt and the anger, right down to the scarred, broken things she kept hidden. He saw the burn mark on her soul. He looked back toward the ridge. "They'll come," he said again. It wasn't a possibility. It was a promise. "Then we stop them," she said, her voice fierce. He said nothing, but he reached for the rifle, and the metallic click as he checked the chamber was his only reply. The smoke hadn't been bait for them. It had been a signal between hunters, and the prey had just stumbled into their camp. Nidita remained a ghost in their shelter. She was too calm, too quiet. She ate what was given, slept when the fire burned low, and never let go of that doll. "She's learning too fast," Nikai observed as they checked a snare. "What do you mean? She's a child." "There's no such thing in a world like this," he said, his voice flat. "She doesn't trust us. She watches, she measures, she's surviving." He was right. Rosa saw it now, the way Nidita's eyes followed their every move, the way she flinched if they moved too quickly. She wasn't a little girl anymore. She was a witness. They found more tracks. Faint this time. 2 days old. Boot prints. Heavy. "Military?" Rosa asked, crouching beside a print. Nikai shook his head. "Worn heels, sharp toe, mercenary, or bounty man." He looked up, his gaze sweeping the empty landscape. "Looking for her, or you." That night Rosa coaxed a little more of the story out of Nidita. The girl spoke in fragments, her eyes fixed on the fire. "I was with my uncle, going north." "What happened?" A pause. The doll's yarn hair was being twisted between her small fingers. "Horses came. Fast. White men. Loud guns." "And your uncle?" Rosa asked gently. Nidita looked down at the doll. "He told me to run." Rosa's chest ached. She remembered her own hiding place, under a porch in Durango. The smell of kerosene, the screams from the chapel. A past she could never outrun was now sitting right in front of her, in the form of a 7-year-old girl. They had to move. The shelter was a tomb waiting to be sealed. Nikai took them to a high ridge overlooking a wide basin. He pointed east, toward the hazy rise of the Sierra Oscura range. "There's a pass through those mountains," he said. "An old trading post in Lincoln County. Half burned, but people hide there. But we'd never make it on foot, not with her." They were trapped. The knowledge settled on Rosa like a shroud. Later, back at the shelter, she cornered him. "If they find us," she said, her voice low and urgent, "if you fall, what do you want me to do?" He looked at her sharply. "I need to know," she insisted. He nodded, his face grim. "You run north. You take her, and you run. Stay off the trails. Don't stop. And you—" "I'll hold them," he said simply, as if he were talking about mending a fence. She didn't argue. She saw the finality in his eyes. He had already made his peace with it. That night, for the first time, they sat together by the fire. Not across from each other, but side by side. Nikai told a story in his own tongue about a black horse that would only let a blind child from his village ride it. Rosa translated what she could for Nidita, and for the first time the little girl smiled. A tiny, fleeting thing, but it was there, a flicker of light in the crushing darkness. As the child slept between them, Rosa stared into the flames. They had to leave at dawn. But where could they go that the monsters wouldn't follow? She whispered it to the fire, a prayer and a curse. "Let them come." They came at dawn, not with flags or bugles, but with a slow, deliberate trail of dust rising from the south. A predator's stroll. Nikai spotted them from the ridge. "4 riders," he said, sliding back down into the shadow of the shelter. "Heavy in the saddle. They're not in a hurry. They know we're here. Rosa was already moving, packing jerky, filling the last water skin, checking the rifle. Every motion was precise, automatic. Nidita stood by the dying fire, clutching her doll, her small face a mask of stone. She had seen this before. How long do we have? Rosa asked. An hour. Maybe less, Nikai said. They're not tracking. They're closing a trap. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. Listen to me. We split up. No! They want to fight. I'll give them one, he said, his voice hard, leaving no room for argument. He pointed to a narrow cleft in the ridge behind them. You take her. Go west. Travel until dark. Then hide in the rocks. I'll lead them east. They'll kill you, she whispered, her heart seizing. If they catch all three of us, they'll kill us all, he countered, his voice softening slightly. This isn't about bravery, Rosa. It's about odds. Give the girl a chance. He was right. The cold, brutal logic of it was undeniable. It didn't make it any easier to swallow. He knelt in front of Nidita. Stay close to her, he commanded gently. Don't run unless she runs. Don't speak unless she speaks. The little girl gave a solemn nod. He stood and gave Rosa one last look, a look that said everything he'd never spoken aloud. Lincoln County, North Fork of the Rio Bonito. Don't be lucky, he said. Be invisible. Then he turned and walked away. No farewell, no final embrace. Just a man walking into the mouth of hell like it was his morning chore. Rosa grabbed Nidita's hand and scrambled into the cleft in the rocks, not looking back. She couldn't. If she looked back, she'd never be able to leave. They heard the first shots in the late afternoon. They had traveled for hours, a desperate, stumbling journey through hard shale and dry gullies. The sharp crack of a rifle echoed over the hills, distant but clear. Nidita froze. Keep walking, Rosa ordered, her voice rough. That means he's still alive. A second shot followed, then a third, then silence. A profound, terrifying silence that stretched for the rest of the day. Rosa didn't stop. She forced her mind to go blank. One foot in front of the other, one shadow to the next. That was how you survived. You didn't think about the worst. You didn't imagine the blood and the pain. You just moved. At dusk, they found a shallow cave hidden behind a tangle of mesquite. They ate dry, hard bread and drank sparingly from the water skin. Nidita curled against Rosa's side and fell into an exhausted sleep. Rosa did not sleep. She sat at the mouth of the cave, the Winchester across her lap, her eyes staring into the darkness. The silence was a roar in her ears. Was he dead? Had they captured him? Was she next? But beneath the fear, something new was taking root, a cold, hard resolve. She wasn't just trying to survive anymore. She was a protector. She was a weapon, and she would not fail. The next day at midday, she saw it, a shape on the horizon, a horse, riderless, limping. She pulled Nidita down behind a cluster of rocks, her heart pounding. As it drew closer, she recognized it. It was Nikai's old paint gelding, the one he said had gone lame. It wore a saddle now. There was a dark, wet patch of blood high on its flank. But it was alive, no rider. Then she saw the marks in the dust behind the animal. Drag marks, like something or someone had been tied to the saddle and pulled. He wasn't dead. He was captured. She stood slowly, raising a hand. The horse stopped, its head low, and let her approach. She took the reins. There was no note, no gear, just an old army-issue saddle with a deep gouge in the leather, as if a knife had missed its mark. She touched the blood on its flank. It was fresh, but not flowing freely. He'd been hurt, taken, and he had sent the horse to them. A final gift, a message. Run. Nidita stood beside her, her small hand finding Rosa's. Is he dead? She whispered. Rosa stared north, toward the jagged line of the mountains. A fire was building in her chest, burning away the fear, leaving only white-hot rage. They weren't going to run, not anymore. I don't know, Rosa said, her voice a low growl, but they're about to wish he was. She swung herself into the saddle, then reached down and pulled Nidita up in front of her. We ride, she said, and the hunt began. She knew where they would be, Dead man's spine. Nakai had told her about it once, a story whispered over a low fire. An old Apache trap, a narrow canyon where the cliffs squeezed in so tight that a handful of warriors could hold off an army. A place where soldiers bled, a place where chiefs had made their last stand. It was a dead end, a choke point, a grave, and it was there she would make hers. She rode the wounded horse hard, pushing it north, following the faint tracks of the four riders. They weren't trying to hide their trail. They were arrogant. They thought the fight was over. They had their prize, the Apache warrior. What was a lone woman and a child to them? They were about to find out. By the next day, they reached the entrance to the canyon. She slid off the horse and guided it and Nadita behind a screen of boulders. She knelt in front of the little girl, taking her small face in her hands. "You stay here," she commanded, her voice leaving no room for fear. "You do not come out. You do not make a sound, no matter what you hear. Do you understand me?" Nadita nodded, her dark eyes wide but resolute. She had seen the change in Rosa. The fear was gone, replaced by something harder, something lethal. Rosa checked the Winchester. He'd given her a box of cartridges. She had used one back in Masila. She had plenty left. She had her knife. She had the rage. It would be enough. She found a perch high on the canyon wall, a flat ledge of rock that gave her a perfect view of the trail below. And she waited. The first rider appeared at dusk, a scout. He rode slow, his rifle across his saddle horn, his eyes scanning the shadows. He passed directly beneath her. As he did, he turned his head, and she saw the brand on his neck, a jagged, ugly B. Burnett's men, the overseer she had killed. His name was Burnett. This was never about Nadita. It was never about Nakai. They had been hunting her all along. They had followed her trail from Santa Lucia, a pack of dogs sent to bring back the runaway property. Finding Nakai and the girl was just a bonus, a prize to be sold. Her blood ran cold, then hot. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was vengeance. 3 more riders followed. They led a spare horse and slumped over its saddle. Tied by his hands was Nakai. He was alive, but his head hung low, and his shirt was dark with blood. They were taking him to be made an example of. Rosa waited until they were deep in the canyon's throat. She laid her traps just as Nakai had taught her. Not with gunpowder, but with rope and rock and the weight of the land itself. A tripwire here. A pile of loose shale balanced precariously there. She was a ghost on the cliffs, a phantom of fury. By the time the moon rose, the kill zone was ready. She crawled back to her perch. Nadita was asleep. Rosa did not sleep. She watched the bounty men's campfire below, a tiny spark of life she was about to extinguish. The attack came just before dawn, but the first shot wasn't hers. It came from the other side of the canyon, from a ledge behind the riders. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the blood-orange sky. Long braid, broad shoulders. Nakai. He wasn't their prisoner. He was their executioner. He had let them capture him. He had let them lead him right where he wanted them. Into his trap. Into her trap. He fired again, and the scout crumpled from his saddle. The other men yelled, scrambling for cover, confused. They ran right into Rosa's path. One hit the tripwire. A cascade of rock and shale thundered down, burying him in an instant. A third dropped to one knee, firing wildly up at Nakai. Rosa fired. The man fell backward, a neat hole in his chest. The last one, the man with the brand, looked up and saw her. His eyes went wide with shock and hatred. "Valdez!" He screamed her old name, the name of the man who had owned her. "You ain't walking out of here!" He fired. The shot went wide. Rosa fired back. The bullet caught him in the shoulder. He dropped behind a boulder, cursing. Below, she saw Nakai slump against the canyon wall. A dark stain was spreading across his side. He'd been hit. The last bounty man saw it too. He rose, pulling a huge Bowie knife, and charged toward the wounded Nakai. Rosa didn't aim. She just fired. The man dropped like a stone, skidding to a halt just feet from Nakai. Then silence. Just the wind, the smell of gunpowder, and the soft drip of blood on stone. She scrambled down the rocks to Nakai. He was conscious, but barely. His breath was shallow. Stupid bastard, she whispered, her voice choked with tears she refused to let fall. You weren't supposed to come back. He managed a thin, bloody smile. Didn't say goodbye. She pressed a strip of her skirt against the wound in his side. It was deep. Too much blood. They're all dead, he rasped. Yes. Good. His hand found hers, his grip surprisingly strong. Take the girl. Go north. Stay off the trails. You're coming with me. He shook his head slowly. The effort seemed to exhaust him. I'd slow you down. We both know it. I don't care. Don't waste what we bought with blood, Rosa. She closed her eyes, the world spinning around her. He was right. He was dying, and he was right. I can't bury you here, she whispered, her voice breaking. The rock is too hard. Leave me, he gasped. No. His breath rattled in his chest. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. He looked at her, his eyes clear for one final moment. You saved us. No, she whispered back, pressing her forehead to his. You saved me. He smiled again, a real one this time, a smile of peace. Then live like it matters. His hand went slack in hers, his eyes closed, and in the cold dawn of the canyon, surrounded by the bodies of their enemies, Rosa was alone again. She stayed through the night. The bodies of Burnett's men lay where they had fallen, broken offerings to the desert. She had taken their water, their bullets, their bandages, and left the rest for the coyotes. Nikai lay under a wool blanket, his skin a pale gray in the firelight. His breath was gone. The silence he left behind was a physical weight, pressing down on her. Nidita slept curled at her side, a small, warm presence in the vast, cold emptiness. Rosa boiled water and cleaned his wound, a pointless ritual of care for a body that could no longer feel it. She worked with a slow, numb precision. She was a machine built for grief. At one point she whispered to the still form beside her, You knew you'd die. The fire crackled, its voice the only answer. But she could hear his voice in her memory, quiet and certain. Didn't matter. He had told her, in those last, fading moments, about a brother he had buried near here, about a wife and child lost in a cavalry raid. He hadn't been an outcast by choice. He had been hollowed out by loss, a man living in the ruins of his own life. I used to think if I stayed angry enough, I'd never feel it again, he had whispered, blood on his lips. Did it work? She'd asked. He had looked at her, his eyes ancient with pain. No. Now she understood. The anger was just a wall. Behind it was a pain so deep it could drown the world. Just before he died, as the stars began to fade, he had reached up and touched her wrist. His fingers were cold. Rosa, he'd whispered. Yes? You were never property. The words had broken something inside her. Not his death, not the fight. But those 4 words, spoken by a dying man in a forgotten canyon, had set her free. It took her the entire next day to dig the grave. The ground fought her for every inch. She used her knife, her hands, a flat piece of shale. Nidita helped, carrying small stones, her face solemn. The girl didn't cry. She understood that some goodbyes were too big for tears. She wrapped him in a thick Apache blanket from his saddle roll. It smelled of cedar and smoke, and him. She placed him in the shallow grave, facing east, toward the sunrise, his knife at his side, his rifle across his chest. She knelt and spoke, first in Spanish, then in English, then in the silence of her heart, a farewell in 3 languages. Nidita stepped forward and gently placed her corn-husk doll on the grave, a child sacrificed for a warrior spirit. Then she took Rosa's hand. That night, camped a mile from the grave, the canyon felt different. It wasn't empty. It was watching over them. Nidita leaned against her as they stared into the fire. He's gone, isn't he? The girl whispered. Yes. He saved us. Yes. A long pause. Then, will we be safe now? Rosa looked at the small, fierce child beside her. She thought of the long road ahead, the world full of men like Burnett. Safety was a lie told to children. No, Rosa said softly. We'll be strong. The girl nodded, as if this was the answer she expected. Before dawn, Rosa took a piece of charcoal from the fire and drew on the canyon wall. A symbol Nikai had once carved in wood. A hawk rising, no name, no words, just wings against stone. She took Nadita's hand, boosted her onto the horse, and they rode north, leaving the canyon and its ghost behind them. She wasn't running anymore. She was leading. They traveled by night, ghosts under a silver moon. The desert was less cruel in the darkness, a place of ancient secrets and watching stars. Rosa led the horse, one hand on the reins, the other steadying Nadita, who was wrapped in Nikai's blanket. During the day, they hid from the sun in dry gullies and under rock overhangs. Rosa taught the girl how to walk without sound, how to read the shadows, how to listen to the language of the wind. Nidita was a quick study. She was a child of this hard land. On the third night, they found the Rio Bonito, a thin ribbon of water cutting through the cracked earth. It was enough. They reached the old trading post on the fifth morning. It was just as Nikai had described it. Half a stone wall, a few collapsed beams, and a chimney pointing at the sky like a broken finger. And behind it, life. Two lean horses were tied to a post. An old woman with silver hair sat on an overturned crate, a rifle resting across her knees. She watched them approach, her eyes sharp and suspicious. Rosa stopped 20 feet away, her hands held out, open and empty. A sign of peace. "You lost?" The woman's voice was gravelly. "Looking for a place to rest," Rosa said. The woman's eyes flickered to Nadita. "The girl's Apache." "Yes." "You running from the law?" "Something worse." The woman considered this for a long moment. "Got any money?" "No." "Got food?" "A little." "Then you can stay one night," the old woman grunted. "After that, we talk." Her name was Marta. She was a widow who had lost her sons to both sides of a war she didn't understand. This ruined post was her final stand, a whisper of a refuge for the forgotten and the hunted. One night became a week became a month. Rosa and Nidita earned their keep. They helped Marta mend the crumbling wall, tend the few goats she kept, and stood watch when strange riders passed. Weeks turned into seasons. The rains came and went. The world kept turning. Nidita began to speak more, telling Rosa small stories about her uncle, about the stars. She didn't cry when she told them. They weren't sad memories. They were just hers. She was piecing herself back together. One morning Rosa woke to find Nidita staring out at the eastern hills. "What are you thinking about?" Rosa asked. The girl turned, her dark eyes clear and steady. "Do you think Nikai sees us?" Rosa knelt beside her. "I think he sees better than we do now." Nidita nodded. "He's in the hawk," she said with certainty. "I saw one yesterday." "So did I," Rosa said. Years passed. Marta grew frail, her bones weary. Rosa took on more of the work, her hands growing calloused, her face weathered by the sun and wind. She became the guardian of their small, broken sanctuary. People came and went. Drifters, deserters, families running from something. Rosa learned to read them, to know who to trust and who to turn away. Nidita grew tall and strong, her laughter finally returning. She learned to shoot, to ride, to listen to the land. One day a young man in a tattered Union coat stumbled into their camp, half dead from thirst. Rosa gave him water and food. He looked from Rosa to Nidita, who stood beside her, a rifle held with easy confidence. "You too, family?" he asked. Rosa said nothing, but Nidita, now a young woman, answered without hesitation. "She's my mother." The word hung in the air, simple and true. It settled in Rosa's chest, a warmth she hadn't felt since before the fire, before the cellar, before the running began. That winter, Marta died peacefully in her sleep. Rosa buried her near the chimney, marking the spot with 3 simple stones. More years passed. The ruin became a home, a community, a place to stop running. One spring, when the desert was in bloom, Rosa and Nidita rode south. It was a long journey back to the canyon. They found the grave. The wind and sand had weathered the stones, but it was still there, undisturbed. The hawk she had drawn on the canyon wall was faded but visible. Nidita placed a fresh hawk feather on the mound of earth. They sat in silence for a long time. The ghosts of that place now quiet and at peace. There's no trail back to where we started, Nidita said, looking at her mother. Rosa looked at the strong, brave woman her daughter had become. She thought of the man sleeping beneath the stones. She thought of the long, bloody road that had led them here. No, Rosa said, a faint smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Only forward. They left the canyon for the last time, riding not into the sunset, but into the dawn. They left nothing behind, but they carried everything with them. The memories, the scars, the love. They were not property. They were not survivors. They were free. Thank you for staying with us for this incredible journey. The story of Rosa, Nakai, and Nidita is a testament to the fact that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who stand with you when the world tries to tear you down. If their story touched your heart, help us keep these stories alive. Hit that like button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every single click helps more than you know. Let me know in the comments below. What was the moment in the story that hit you the hardest? I read every single one. Until next time, stay strong and never let anyone tell you who you are.